Nobody noticed the old woman in the corner, not until she finally spoke. The living room buzzed with movement. The late George Whitmore's sprawling farmhouse had become a nesting ground for tension, all hidden behind polite smiles and soft condolences. Somewhere between the fourth casserole dish and the third bourbon pour, the grief had turned performative. Grandma Mavis sat in her usual chair, half shadowed by the drawn curtain. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against the worn oak armrest, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. Nobody noticed. They rarely did anymore. Elaine, her daughter, passed by several times carrying plates or whispering arguments to her husband, but never once did her eyes settle on Mavis. The others barely acknowledged her at all. To them, she had faded into the fabric of the house, like wallpaper. Safe. Silent. Harmless. Until she moved. It was subtle, just a shift in her breathing, but then she reached for her cane, straightened her back, and cleared her throat. "There's something I need to say." The room didn't fall silent so much as it paused. Like a breath held in the middle of a sentence. A few people chuckled awkwardly, assuming she was about to mumble some prayer or anecdote about George's boyhood mischief. But something in her eyes stopped Elaine in her tracks. Mavis's voice wasn't frail or wandering. It rang clear, like polished glass. "It's about your mother," she said, locking eyes with her granddaughter. "And the part of her story none of you know." Elaine slowly set down the tray she was holding. Cousin Robert snorted. "Mavis, maybe now's not the..." "Sit down, Robert," she said without looking at him. That got everyone's attention. She looked around the room, her face expressionless but her eyes ablaze. "You all came here for answers. To understand what George left behind. You think it's just about money. But George left something far more dangerous than that. He left a history." Her voice dipped. "And I can no longer carry it alone." Uneasy glances bounced around the room. Someone turned off the television. Even the children sensed a shift in the air and hushed their laughter from upstairs. Elaine finally sat, arms crossed, jaw tight. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Mavis smiled faintly, not at her daughter, but at a memory only she could see. "I'm talking about the child I lost. The one none of you even know existed." A beat. Then a sharp inhale from the far end of the room. "Before Elaine was born, I had another child. A boy." Gasps and murmurs erupted, but Mavis raised a wrinkled hand, and again, silence obeyed her. "You think you know me. You think I just grew old and small and forgettable. But you don't know the half of it. That boy didn't die. He was taken. And I've spent the last 60 years waiting for this family to be ready to hear what really happened to him." She wasn't always a grandma. Once, she had secrets too dark to say aloud. The silence that followed Mavis's declaration was thick enough to choke on. No one knew whether to challenge her, comfort her, or just get up and leave the room. But she didn't wait for permission. Her eyes, gray and sharp, drifted toward the hearth. "It was the summer of '63. I wasn't even 20 yet. I had dreams, if you can believe it. Dreams bigger than this house and this family." She began painting a picture. The world she described was full of color and movement, factory whistles, jukeboxes, the clatter of waitress trays at the local diner. She had been bold once, with a waistline and wit that turned heads. She had caught the eye of a man no one approved of, James Ellison, a colored factory worker who played jazz guitar at night and read Baldwin during his lunch breaks. Elaine looked stunned. "You were with James Ellison?" Robert muttered, "Isn't that the guy who got run out of town?" Mavis ignored them. Her voice softened. "James saw me. Not as someone's daughter, or wife-to-be. Just me. We were in love. And then I got pregnant." A chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Someone stood and left the room, but Mavis didn't flinch. "I didn't tell anyone for weeks. But when I did, everything shattered." The family had reacted with disgust. Her father slapped her. Her mother cried for days. George, her eventual husband, had already proposed by then. They forced her to lie, to say she'd been taken advantage of. James was fired. The sheriff suggested he leave town. No one saw him again. I never got to say goodbye, Mavis said. I was told the baby died at birth. But, she held up a hand, trembling. A nurse told me otherwise. Just 3 words, he's not gone. Then she disappeared. Transferred, they said. Her voice cracked, for the first time. And that's when I knew something terrible had happened. That I wasn't crazy. That my son was alive. Everyone stared at her now. The room was no longer dismissive, it was stunned. Elaine whispered, "What did you do next?" Mavis leaned forward. I started searching. Even if it meant losing everything. Some children are lost to time. Others are buried by silence. The hospital was the first place I went back to, Mavis said, folding her hands on her lap, the bones protruding like thin branches. 3 days after they released me. I walked in still sore, bleeding, half hysterical. I asked for records. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled. They told me nothing existed. That there was no baby born to Mavis Whitmore. That I must have imagined it. Elaine flinched. But, you had him. You remember? I remember every scream, every push. I remember his cry. It was brief, but it was real. Mavis shook her head. They tried to gaslight me. Back then, it was easy. No rights for unwed mothers. No protection. Just shame. She described wandering the hospital halls, peering through nursery glass, hoping to glimpse his face. A nurse with trembling eyes stopped her, whispered, "You need to leave. For your own safety." Mavis never saw her again. So she turned to other methods. She snuck into city records. Pretended to be a reporter. She wrote letters to adoption agencies under fake names. Dead ends. Every time. James tried to help at first. We met in secret, in the woods behind the church. But his family was threatened. He had to go. He didn't even say goodbye. Just vanished. Her voice cracked again. That was the last time I saw him. Elaine was pale. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because, sweetheart, I was told if I ever did, they'd come for you next. Gasps rippled across the room. Robert dropped his drink. Mavis looked each of them in the eye. You were leverage. Insurance to keep me quiet. So I shut up. Played the good wife. The grieving mother. The obedient daughter-in-law. But I never stopped looking. She opened her purse and pulled out a creased envelope. Inside was a black and white photo of a baby, hospital ID tag still on his wrist. The nurse slipped this into my coat the night I left. It's the only proof I have that he existed. Elaine reached out, touched the photo like it was sacred. What happened to him, Mom? Mavis stared into the fire. I don't know. But I think someone here does. A nurse whispered something that haunted her forever, he's not gone. Mavis leaned forward as if each word cost her a year of her life. The nurse's name was Bernice. She had kind eyes. Young. She was trembling when she told me. I think she wanted to say more, but she looked over her shoulder and just walked away. Elaine asked, "Did you ever find her again?" No, Mavis replied. She disappeared from the hospital the same week. They told me she transferred to another county. But when I asked where, nobody knew. She stood slowly, walked to the old bookcase by the window, and pulled out a faded red journal. This is where I started keeping everything. Every lead. Every whisper. Even dreams I thought might mean something. She flipped to a page marked with a yellow ribbon. On it, dates, names, and addresses scribbled in messy handwriting. A pattern of visits, hospital workers, agencies. I couldn't ask George for help. He was already angry about James. And he had friends in law enforcement. They knew how to make things disappear. So I started asking questions quietly. A cold chill crept over the room. Mavis continued, "One night, I was walking home from the record office when I felt it. Someone behind me. I turned. No one. But then it happened again. Next night, same thing. I knew someone was watching me." Elaine leaned forward. "Who was it?" "I never saw their face. Just a figure. Always behind. Always still." I told myself it was paranoia. But one night, I came home to find the latch on the back door broken. And a page missing from my journal. Robert scoffed. "You think someone broke in for a piece of paper?" Mavis glared at him. "Not just any paper, it had a name on it. A woman who claimed to have seen a baby boy get taken out the back of the hospital that night. Not through the nursery. Through the morgue." Gasps filled the room. "That woman's name was Lillian Duke." Elaine froze. "Wait. Lillian Duke? Our housekeeper?" Mavis nodded. "She didn't just clean our house. She cleaned up your grandfather's messes. Sometimes protection comes at a price." "George came to me that night," Mavis said. "After I confronted Lillian. I knew something was wrong when he didn't deny it. He just sat down, poured himself a drink, and said, 'You need to stop.'" She paused, her voice flat. "He didn't look angry. He looked scared." George admitted that his parents orchestrated the entire thing. The Whitmore name couldn't survive a mixed-race grandchild. They arranged for the baby to be removed. Sent away. Raised elsewhere. But they needed Mavis's cooperation. He said it was done. That I couldn't undo it. And then he said something that still makes my blood cold. Elaine leaned forward. "What?" "He said, 'If you love Elaine, you'll stop digging.'" The room was dead silent. I asked him what that meant. He said accidents happen. Houses catch fire. Kids wander into the road. He didn't say it with menace. He said it like a fact. Like something he'd already prepared for. She reached into her journal and pulled out a page folded in thirds. An old notarized document. "They made me sign this. It was the only way I could keep Elaine safe. I was forced to legally surrender all parental rights to my firstborn in exchange for silence. If I broke it, there would be consequences." Robert stared at the document. This is real." Elaine was trembling. "He threatened me as a child, and you signed it to protect me?" Mavis nodded, eyes glassy. "I signed away my son to save my daughter." Mavis didn't just lose her child. She was blackmailed into giving him up under threat of Elaine's life. "But I never stopped watching him," Mavis whispered. "He grew up just a few streets away. And one day, he came to the house. You never forget the place where you last saw your child. He lived just 4 blocks away," Mavis said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The house with the green shutters." Everyone turned toward her, confused. Elaine furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" "I found out when he was around 9, Mavis said. I overheard a conversation at the hair salon. A woman mentioned a boy recently adopted by a well-to-do couple. They said he was quiet. Bright eyes. Uncanny resemblance to someone they couldn't quite name." She turned the page of her journal, revealing a faded photograph, a young boy on a tricycle, the green shutters of a house clearly visible in the background. "I took this with a disposable camera," she said. "I would walk past that house every Sunday after church. I told George the first was visiting a friend. But I just stood there, pretending to read mail or fix my shoe, anything to see him." Elaine took the photo, studying it. "So, you knew where he was all along?" "Not always. They moved in and out a few times. But for most of his youth, I watched him grow up. I saw him fall off his bike, sneak out at night, get into fights. Graduate high school. I was there for all of it. From the shadows." Robert looked baffled. And you never said a word? Never approached him? I couldn't. If they knew I was close, they would take him again. Or worse. I didn't know who was still watching. Who might report back to George or his parents. So I watched. That was all I had. Elaine asked, did he ever see you? Mavis hesitated. Once. Just once. He was about 16. He looked right at me. Stared. I turned away, heart pounding. But he didn't follow. Didn't say anything. I think he sensed something. Mavis pulled out another photo. This one was more recent. A man in his 30s, helping move boxes out of a truck. In the background, the Whitmore house. Elaine felt a chill run through her. That's from last year. When the guest house was being renovated. Mavis nodded slowly. Yes. He was one of the contractors. Your father hired him. Robert's jaw dropped. You're saying he was here? On our property? More than once, Mavis replied. He helped fix the fence. Painted the barn. I don't think your father recognized him. Or maybe he did. Elaine clutched the photo. Who is he now? What name does he go by? Mavis looked at her, eyes trembling. I only know the name he was given, Aaron. You've met him before, Mavis said. And I believe, he came back for a reason. He was always around the edges, like a ghost hiding in plain sight. Elaine stared at the photo of the man loading boxes, her fingers trembling. She remembered him now. Tall, quiet, polite. He never spoke much, just nodded when spoken to. There was something vaguely familiar about him even then, but she'd chalked it up to déjà vu. Mavis slowly flipped through another set of photos, some in black and white, others in dull, faded color. I kept track as best I could. Some were taken by me. Others I bought from a woman who lived next door to him. She laid out the photos like a puzzle. In several of them, there he was, Aaron. Always on the edge of a group, never centered. At community picnics. Church fundraisers. Even Elaine's own engagement party. Robert leaned in. He was at that party? Mavis nodded. He catered it. He worked for the event company. You all said he was just another server. But I knew. Elaine picked up a picture from 10 years ago. Her daughter's birthday. In the background, blurry but unmistakable, Aaron, fixing a string of lights on the fence. Why was he always near us? She asked. Was he following us? I don't know, Mavis admitted, but it wasn't coincidence. Not that many times. He was searching, too. For something. Or someone. Elaine suddenly stood and crossed the room to a bookshelf. She grabbed a dusty family album and opened it. Wait, she whispered. There's a photo in here, from the cabin trip. She flipped rapidly until she found it, a group shot of the entire family outside the Whitmore cabin, winter snow behind them. In the corner, nearly out of frame, a figure was turning away from the camera. Elaine held the album up to Mavis. Is this him? Mavis looked long and hard. Then she nodded. Yes, Robert exhaled. This is insane. He's been everywhere. Elaine turned to Mavis, her voice cracking. Did Dad know? Mavis shook her head slowly. I asked him once, years ago. I showed him a photo. He said nothing. Just got up and left the room. That was the only time he ever raised his hand to me. A beat of silence. The next day, that photo was gone. Burned in the fireplace. Elaine sat heavily. Her hands gripped the album like it was a life raft. Why would Aaron come so close? Why now? Mavis didn't answer at first. She was staring past the room, into memory, because something changed. He left town right after your father died, Mavis said softly. And I think, he took something with him. Sometimes dead men leave the loudest confessions. The room had quieted into a stunned stillness, as if the air itself had grown dense with memory. Elaine could no longer sit still. She rose, pacing the room, trying to digest what she'd just heard. "You think he came back for something?" she asked. Mavis nodded. "Something only your father had." Elaine turned sharply. "What did he take, Mavis?" But before the old woman could answer, a faint creak interrupted the silence. Everyone turned. The sound had come from above, from the floorboards of George Whitmore's old study. Elaine moved like she was pulled by a string. She climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The study door was slightly ajar. The scent of tobacco and old paper hit her instantly. Her father's scent. She moved to the desk first, instinctively pulling open drawers, sifting through papers. Nothing. Then her gaze fell on the floorboards beneath the old leather armchair. One board was lighter than the rest. She crouched and pulled. It came loose with surprising ease. Beneath it lay a small wooden box, dusty but intact. Elaine opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope, her father's name etched in his unmistakable penmanship, to be opened by Aaron, and no one else. Her breath caught. She carefully peeled it open. The letter inside was dated 6 months before George's death. "Aaron, if you're reading this, then I've done the one decent thing left in me. I knew who you were the moment I saw you. You look like your mother, though you carry James's eyes. I watched you work on the fence and knew I owed you more than words could ever repay." Elaine swallowed. "I made a mistake. A series of them. I let fear and pride steal your life from your mother. From you, I followed orders. I made sure the paperwork disappeared. I made your existence a rumor. And then I spent the rest of my life building fences around that lie." The handwriting wavered toward the bottom. There was a splotch. Red. Almost like blood. The final line was half-written, "There is something buried behind the..." It ended there. Elaine sat back, stunned. She rushed downstairs, the letter clutched in her hand. Everyone looked up as she re-entered the room. "He knew," she said, breathless. "Dad knew all along. He confessed." She handed the letter to Mavis, who read it silently, her hands shaking. Robert took a step forward. "What's behind what? The house? The barn?" Elaine whispered, "We need to find out." "But there's more." There was blood. On the letter. Mavis paled. "Blood?" Elaine nodded slowly. This wasn't just some sentimental goodbye. This letter was interrupted. "Dad never mailed this," Elaine said. "Because something, or someone, stopped him. There are inheritances of money, and then there are inheritances of guilt." Elaine couldn't sleep. That night, after the letter was read and reread, she crept back into her father's study with a flashlight and a crowbar. Something told her the hidden letter wasn't the only secret buried under those floorboards. She pried up more planks, knees aching on the hardwood. After half an hour of scraping and splinters, her crowbar struck something metallic. A fireproof envelope case. Inside was a folder labeled, "Revised Will." She pulled out the document and her hands trembled. George Whitmore had indeed written a second will, one never filed, never seen. Dated 3 months before his death. The beneficiary? Aaron. Sole heir. Elaine clutched the papers, her mind reeling. Her father had planned to give everything to the son he denied for decades. Why hadn't anyone seen this? Why wasn't it part of probate? She flipped through the pages and froze. The back of the envelope still held a sticky fingerprint, dark, unmistakable. Elaine rushed downstairs and grabbed a portable fingerprint kit she used for teaching crime fiction seminars. She dusted the print gently, then compared it to a glass her cousin Robert had been drinking from. A match. Elaine returned to the living room where Robert and others were gathered. The letter from earlier lay open on the coffee table. "You were in the study the night before Dad died," she said quietly. Robert frowned. "What? So were you." Elaine held up the envelope. But I didn't touch this. You did. You opened it. You saw the new will. And then, you hid it. He stood abruptly. You're out of your mind. Mavis didn't flinch. Tell the truth, Robert. Did George tell you about Aaron? Did you know he was changing the will? Robert's jaw clenched. He was senile. He didn't know what he was doing. Giving everything to some stranger? No. No way. Elaine stepped forward. He wasn't a stranger. He was George's son. Your cousin. A long, unbearable silence. Finally, Robert muttered, I thought I was protecting the family. Elaine hissed, by destroying a man's right to his legacy? Mavis shook her head. He didn't just destroy a will. He destroyed a confession. Elaine whispered, we need to find Aaron, before someone else does. Secrets fester best in the dark. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. Thick clouds clawed at the sky, and wind lashed against the farmhouse like an angry spirit. By dusk, rain pelted the windows. The power flickered once. Then again. Then it died. Total darkness. A few screams from the younger kids upstairs. Then silence. Elaine lit candles from the emergency kit in the hall closet, her hands shaking more than she wanted to admit. The whole house took on a new dimension in the candlelight, older, deeper, full of shadows. They gathered in the living room. Mavis sat still, her eyes distant. This house, she said, has always been loudest in the dark. Tension was thick as fog. Robert sat far from the others. Elaine clutched the will, wrapped in a plastic sleeve. She wasn't letting it go. We need to talk about Aaron, Elaine said. We need to find him. Before Robert or anyone else tries to make this go away. Robert slammed his fist on the table. I didn't hurt him. I didn't even know he was George's son until last night. Mavis interrupted, her voice surprisingly strong. But someone else did. George. And you know what I think? I think he knew he didn't have much time left. That letter upstairs? That wasn't a farewell. That was a confession. One he knew might never make it out. Elaine nodded. And the blood, it was fresh. The room grew colder. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house. Everyone froze. Elaine grabbed a fireplace poker. Robert followed, holding a flashlight. They found nothing. Just a broken frame in the mudroom. But on the floor beneath it, a slip of paper. Old. Torn. A prescription bottle label. With George's name. He was dying, Elaine whispered. He knew. Cancer, maybe, something painful. Back in the living room, Mavis sat like stone. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke, he asked me to do it. Everyone turned. George, she said. He asked me to help him die. Said he couldn't face what he'd done. That Aaron would never forgive him. That he didn't want to rot away under guilt and chemo. Elaine went cold. Mom, are you saying? I gave him the pills, Mavis said. He wanted it. Begged me. I sat with him while he drifted off. Held his hand until he stopped breathing. Stunned silence. Then someone sobbed. Mavis didn't just lose her son, she ended her husband's life. Not out of revenge, but mercy. Mavis looked straight at Elaine. He told me one more thing before he died. Something about Aaron, something I never told anyone. What do you do when the person you love becomes your captor? The storm passed by morning, leaving a damp hush over the house and yard. The air smelled like wet earth and old wood. Birds chirped hesitantly, unsure if the silence was real. Mavis asked to be taken to the orchard. No one questioned it. Elaine helped her into a coat and walked her across the muddy yard, down the path George had carved through the apple trees years ago. The orchard was just starting to bloom, buds of green clinging to the branches. They sat on the bench George built long ago, under the tree where Elaine used to read as a girl. He told me the truth that night, Mavis said, her voice low. George. About how it all started. Elaine sat beside her, silent. He never wanted Aaron gone, Mavis continued. Not at first. But his parents threatened to cut him off. Said they'd ruin him, ruin me, if the baby stayed. They claimed James was a communist, a criminal. They spun lies. But George, he didn't stop them. She traced the grain of the wooden bench with her thumb. And then it got worse. After you were born, he became possessive. Afraid I'd run. He didn't hit me often. Just enough. But the threats were constant. The orchard became my prison. Elaine turned sharply. What do you mean? He made sure I never had money. No friends. I wasn't allowed into town alone for years. I used to sneak out, just to breathe. But the orchard, it was the only place he let me walk freely. She looked up at the trees. I buried things here. Not bodies. Secrets. Journals. Photos. The first time I found one of Aaron's school flyers in a neighbor's trash, I came here and buried it like a relic. Every shred of him I could find, I buried it under this tree. Elaine was stunned. You were grieving in silence. 4 decades. Mavis nodded. This orchard was my confession booth. My cemetery. My chapel. Elaine looked around, tears rising. What did Dad tell you, before he died? Mavis closed her eyes. That Aaron had come back. That he'd spoken to him. That he knew Aaron had figured it out. And? That Aaron was planning something. Not revenge, George said. But a reckoning. Elaine stood slowly. We need to dig. Right here. Under this tree. The truth is heavier when it's preserved. Elaine returned from the orchard with dirt under her fingernails and a heaviness in her chest. The box they unearthed was rusted but intact. Mavis sat beside her in the living room, eyes glazed, while the others gathered around. Inside the box, photos, newspaper clippings, notes scribbled on yellowed paper. It was a timeline of Aaron's life. Every stage. Every sighting. Every possible connection. But there was more. This one, Elaine said, pulling out a photograph, is dated just a week before Dad died. He's in our backyard. How did we not notice this man walking among us for so long? Mavis held up another item, a map. Hand-drawn. It marked their house, the orchard, and the old tool shed behind the barn. Elaine stood quickly. That shed's been locked for years. Dad always said it was full of junk. They grabbed flashlights and made their way to the barn. The shed door was rusted shut, the padlock corroded. Robert brought bolt cutters. With a satisfying crack, the lock broke. The door creaked open. Dust danced in the beams of their lights. But what they saw inside stopped them cold. Lining the walls were photos, hundreds of them. Aaron. From a baby to a man. Walking dogs, playing basketball, sitting alone on a park bench. Who took these? Robert asked, his voice dry. Elaine walked deeper inside. On the work table, journals. Some in George's handwriting. Others unknown. Mavis leaned in, reading one aloud, saw him again today. Age 10. Reading on the porch. Looks just like James. I told the man to keep bringing him here. The boy must stay close. It's safer this way. Elaine gasped. Wait. Dad wasn't just hiding Aaron. He was watching him. Obsessively, she flipped open another journal. Inside were detailed notes, Aaron's friends, his jobs, his aliases. There were letters, unsent. Scribbled lines of apology, then crossed out. He knew what he'd done, Mavis whispered. And he couldn't stop watching. Elaine opened a drawer. Inside, a stack of VHS tapes. Each labeled with dates. One tape caught her eye, confession, play alone. Elaine turned to Mavis. I think it's time we heard exactly what Dad was so afraid of saying aloud. Some truths need to be watched in private. Elaine waited until the others went to bed. She carried the tape and a dusty VHS player to the den, where the old TV still worked. She closed the door, drew the curtains, and pushed the tape into the slot. It began with static. Then a shaky frame. George Whitmore sat at his desk, gaunt, unshaven, his eyes hollow. "Aaron," he said. "If you're seeing this, then I'm gone. And I probably deserve it." Elaine froze. "I lied to everyone. About everything. Your mother. Your father. About you. But you were never supposed to be erased. That was my parents' doing. I was a coward. I let them take you. I watched it happen. I signed the papers myself." George coughed violently. His voice grew raspy. "I followed you your whole life. Paid to keep you nearby. I needed to make sure you were safe. That Mavis didn't find out. That no one did. I told myself I was protecting the family. But the truth is, I was protecting myself." The camera shook as he reached out, as if to shut it off. But then he sat back down. "I saw you here, on the property. Working. Helping. You didn't even know who I was. But I knew. I wanted to speak to you, I just couldn't." George blinked rapidly, tears running down his face. "I told Mavis the truth in the end. She deserved that. So did you. I asked her to end it because I couldn't face it all anymore." He paused, breathing heavily. "There is something I never told even Mavis. Something only you should know." Elaine leaned forward. "You were never alone. Someone else knew. Someone I trusted. Someone who—" Suddenly, there was a crash off camera. George turned sharply. The tape jolted. His voice dropped. "You're here?" Another voice replied, off-screen. Elaine's blood ran cold. The voice was familiar. Warm. Even kind. "We can't let her find this, George. Not now." George's voice trembled. "It's too late. I've said it. He has to know." The tape ended in a burst of static. Elaine sat in stunned silence. The other voice. She knew it. It was her godfather. Elaine whispered aloud, "He was there. The night Dad died. And he's been lying to us ever since. He was the first to arrive. The first to cry. The first to lie." Elaine didn't sleep. Morning light spilled into the kitchen as she poured coffee with trembling hands. Her godfather, Carl, had always been the rock of the family, her father's closest friend, her childhood protector. He was also, apparently, a liar. He arrived around 9. Unannounced, casual. Same friendly grin. Elaine waited until he poured his coffee. "Why didn't you tell me you were there the night my father died?" Carl paused. Then slowly set his cup down. "So you watched the tape?" Mavis entered the room. Carl looked at her, a flicker of something like shame crossing his face. "I tried to stop him," he said. George was unraveling. He wanted to unbury everything. "I told him it would only hurt you all." Elaine folded her arms. "That's not your decision." Carl looked at Mavis. "You think I wanted any of this?" "I helped cover it up because George was family to me. Because you were. I didn't know about Aaron until it was too late." Mavis raised an eyebrow. "Too late for what?" Carl sighed. "When Aaron came back, I recognized him. Instantly. I was at the diner when he fixed the electrical work. I saw his face and knew." Elaine stepped closer. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because George asked me to stay silent. He wanted to speak to him himself. But then—" He hesitated. "Then I found out about the will. And I panicked. I thought Aaron was trying to take everything. That he was here to hurt you." I thought maybe George was right to keep it buried. Elaine was livid. So you watched him die and said nothing? Carl's voice cracked. I sat with him while he passed. I held his hand. And I swore I'd protect what was left. But you didn't, Elaine said. You protected a lie. Carl looked at her, and for the first time all the years showed on his face. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here because I got a letter. From Aaron. Yesterday. Mavis tensed. What did it say? That he's coming back. Not for revenge. Not for the will. But for the truth. Elaine whispered, then we'd better be ready. Because he's not coming back as a stranger anymore. He was the first to arrive. The first to cry. The first to lie. Elaine didn't sleep. Morning light spilled into the kitchen as she poured coffee with trembling hands. Her godfather, Carl, had always been the rock of the family, her father's closest friend, her childhood protector. He was also, apparently, a liar. He arrived around 9. Unannounced, casual. Same friendly grin. Elaine waited until he poured his coffee. Why didn't you tell me you were there the night my father died? Carl paused. Then slowly set his cup down. So you watched the tape? Mavis entered the room. Carl looked at her, a flicker of something like shame crossing his face. I tried to stop him, he said. George was unraveling. He wanted to unbury everything. I told him it would only hurt you all. Elaine folded her arms. That's not your decision. Carl looked at Mavis. You think I wanted any of this? I helped cover it up because George was family to me. Because you were. I didn't know about Aaron until it was too late. Mavis raised an eyebrow. Too late for what? Carl sighed. When Aaron came back, I recognized him. Instantly. I was at the diner when he fixed the electrical work. I saw his face and knew. Elaine stepped closer. Then why didn't you say anything? Because George asked me to stay silent. He wanted to speak to him himself. But then. He hesitated. Then I found out about the will. And I panicked. I thought Aaron was trying to take everything. That he was here to hurt you. I thought maybe George was right to keep it buried. Elaine was livid. So you watched him die and said nothing? Carl's voice cracked. I sat with him while he passed. I held his hand. And I swore I'd protect what was left. But you didn't, Elaine said. You protected a lie. Carl looked at her, and for the first time all the years showed on his face. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here because I got a letter. From Aaron. Yesterday. Mavis tensed. What did it say? That he's coming back. Not for revenge. Not for the will. But for the truth. Elaine whispered, then we'd better be ready. Because he's not coming back as a stranger anymore.